Welcome to our 51st podcast. Today we'll be talking about organizational assessments with their very special guest, Katie Thomas. What's the one thing you can do now to ensure you don't skip your why and jump to the what when running an assessment? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. As always, we're so glad to have you here with us. Welcome back to the Harmonious Workplaces podcast. My name is Rich Cruz, an organizational development consultant here in the Chicagoland area, and I'm joined, as always, by my colleagues Cheryl Volpe.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Rich.
And Ben Kleinman.
Hey, everyone.
And we have a special guest today from across the pond, right? We've got Katie Thomas. Hi, Katie. How are you?
Yay. Thank you for having me. I'm very well.
Oh, thanks so much for being here.
Cool.
Is this our first international?
No, it's our third international adventure.
That's right. Yeah.
We had Rich Cruz going all the way to Canada, and we had a podcast with some other folks in the UK, and now we're back to the UK for more.
Fantastic. So, Katie,
applying for citizenship soon enough.
Right on. So, Katie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a business psychologist working in lovely Surrey, England. And I've been working in psychometrics and assessment design and delivery for the last 10 years. So all things kind of personality, ability measurement, judgment, motivation measurement, and how to put those things into good use as well.
Oh, very good. Okay. So psychometrics. So we're actually putting some science into the workplace.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, if you break down the word psychometrics, it's measuring the mind. So it's anything that kind of comes to mind, you're measuring those things.
Right on. Cool. So could you maybe give us a little, an example of like some of the kinds of stuff that you would assess in a company?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do all kinds of things with selection and development. So if it's something that you need to make sure that someone is going to do a job properly, we will define that and measure it. And the same goes for development as well. So before you know what you need to do better in, you need to be able to kind of define those areas and those behaviors. And that's what we do.
Sure.
We develop those assessments from scratch and use those for making people better and happier in their jobs.
Go figure. Actually trying to make sense of things before you start trying to change them. Yeah.
It's crazy. Katie, is there something about the metrics that you decide to use with your clients that you have to then figure out how you validate them, or does that come later in the process?
Yeah, so everything has to be measurable. So sometimes we have a very nebulous idea of what makes someone good at a role, but we have to be able to break that down into specific behavioral measures. And once we've got those specific behavioral measures, there are different types of validity. So that's getting into the kind of scientific nitty-gritty stuff. But there are different types of validity that you can go for. So even just having something super job relevant and making sure you've ticked that box and got that crossed off, you've got your kind of content validity. And then you can look at how the factors in your behaviors fall. So making sure that everything you're measuring in one particular area is actually measuring that particular area. So you can look falling into different factors of behaviors as well. And then the best kind of validity is when you've got criterion validity and you can say, actually, yes, I'll hang my hat on this. and say that if we're measuring this at point one, when we come to measure it again using manager ratings or real performance metrics, it's predicting that measure at the second point. And that's the kind of gold standard of validity.
Wow, okay, so predictive that actually has some credibility behind it, that as a business leader, you'd be able to say, "Okay, we've used this tool and we trust it, and we can use it in a predictive fashion and trust that that's gonna be a fairly accurate
Yeah,
prediction."
absolutely. Absolutely. If you're
That's so
looking to
cool.
validate someone's communication, you want to make sure that it is communication that you are measuring.
Yeah.
Katie, I wonder with a typical client, if there is even a typical client, how much of those tests are off the shelf and how much is customized to the client percentage wise, average? I mean, you're talking about different criteria. It's nebulous when you walk in, you find out what the company needs. And then how do you dovetail what exists already with what they need?
Do you know it varies. It varies a ton. It depends. And such
Depends.
a psychologist answer, but we work with a whole host of organizations, and we are test diagnostic test agnostic. That's it. Test
Agnostic, yes.
agnostic. So sometimes for people, an off the shelf assessment is absolutely the right thing for them. That it's ready to go. It's available in different languages. All of these things. It's you can pick it up and go straight away. And that will be the right answer for that organization. And we will support that person, that organization in using that assessment with however they need our support. But otherwise, sometimes a bespoke approach, if there's time to put in a resource and develop something that really has a company's feel, has a company's language, represents those people in the organization, their working culture, maybe their geographical culture, that's where that bespoke approach is going to be really, really valuable. But it really varies. It can be between kind of tiny and massive organizations, whether they choose to go with that bespoke route or using an off the shelf approach.
Sure,
Do you
sure.
f
Makes
I'm sorry to jump in. Do you find, Katie, that the language in an assessment influences how people r react to that assessment? And so, like you were saying, if it's bespoke and if it's in their language and sort of phrased within their cultural norms, does that make people a little more comfortable with the assessment,
It really
or
does.
does it not work that
It
way?
it really does, and you think, how many names are there for kind of team building? But if you use the right term that is going to kind of hit home and resonate with people, it just
Mhm.
feels so much more relevant. It feels like, oh, this assessment actually is for me. This is worth putting my time into. And
Right.
it seems like a small thing, but it makes a massive difference. And the way that we talk about assessments and the language that we use in assessment, it sets up that person for doing well in that assessment. You could think about kind of selection for emerging talent and someone that's just out of school that's never seen an assessment like this before, something that's written in a really formal, scary way. It instantly just kind of puts that person off. You write it in a more down to earth kind of language, it's going to feel so much more supportive and reassuring. And then you're helping the best out of that person in that assessment.
That's
That makes
fascinating.
a lot of sense,
Yeah, totally makes
for
sense.
sure.
That resonates a
Yeah.
lot with stuff that we've talked about on many of our shows and just tailoring our language and our communication methodologies to individual people and their needs, which vary so often across departments or time or personality. So that makes total
Mm.
sense.
Yeah. I'd like to I'd like to take a quick break, but when we come back, and I'm saying this before the break because I wanted to give you just a second to think about this. We often talk about organizational change and then the adoption of different processes and all that. Um, and sometimes, in my experience, uh, it's harder to get some of the executives, maybe, or even the managers, to buy into the use of
Mm.
assessments. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Um, could we explore that when we come back from the break?
Rich, you think it's harder to get managers to buy in or employees to buy in?
No, I'll be honest with you. This is the thing. There's both, right? But
Mhm.
sometimes, and you know, I'm just speaking from experience.
Sure.
Sometimes the executives find some of these the assessments a little, lack of a better word, squishy. Then
Mhm.
the
You need
and I think
documentation
this,
and get those validated,
yeah.
predictive,
Well,
trustworthy metrics.
that's just it. I think they may have been burned by some of the old
Yeah.
uh, invalid or
Mhm.
frankly spurious assessments
Or
that have been out
yeah, or
there.
stuff that's too generic or not targeted. Like Katie was saying, if it's not targeted at and credible about what you're trying to measure,
Right.
it's just data soup. It's useless.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. Is that okay? Is that fair to do?
I want to hear what
Okay.
happens in both camps because I
In
think
both
both
camps,
right.
that'd be
I
great.
think
Yeah.
there's
Oh yeah.
resistance
So just
on both
adoption
levels.
and adoption in general.
Mm.
Let's do that. So
It's like I'm so sorry, Rich. I know you're trying to get there.
yeah,
It's
I
like
was
Spy
almost
versus
there, but
Spy.
go
In those
ahead.
old cartoons, the Mad Magazine cartoon, Spy versus Spy, assessment versus assessment. Yep.
Right.
It's old
Oh,
school
I
business, right?
remember.
Well, you just dated all of us, Ben. Thank you so much.
I mean, I don't
You're
remember. I have no idea what you're talking
Cheryl saw a reference on an old time movie reel when she was in grade school. They were
there you
showing old cartoons.
there you go. Okay. We'll be right back. Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we have been talking with our special guest, Katie Thomas, and we're here talking about assessments, right? And so before the break, I just kind of teed up, hopefully, something that is, well, I mean, it's kind of something that I've seen a lot of, and we talk a lot about this, is, change resistance in the sense of adoption of something new, right? And part of that being, here, the use of assessments, and, frankly, more valid and reliable instruments than have probably been used previously. Um, so, I brought up about like having leaders and managers buy into that, who may have been burned in the past, but then there's also having the rest of the workforce, buy into that. So, any thoughts on that whole adoption spectrum?
I think when it comes to the broad kind of working population and adoption, it's making sure that people know why that assessment is being used, and there's transparency in the framing of what the assessment is and what its intention is. I think there's naturally some kind of distrust around anything brand new where there's this I don't know, something you can't kind of see into, and it just feels like you're going to get scored. And then what happens with that number? Who's going to see it? How's it being used? How are you being judged? That it's a laden kind of term. And I think, having that transparency around its use is instantly going to take away some of those questions and the resistance that comes with it. questions.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And by the way, it's Transparency Tuesday that Ben usually does a Transparency Tuesday post on LinkedIn. So if you
Yeah,
find Ben,
that's a
you'll
little
find
more
that. But
specific to AI, and thank you for the shout out.
Mm.
But for sure, I think we need transparency across everything we do in change management. And Katie, it sounds like we need that in droves in our assessments across the leadership level, and someone who might be saying, "I want to assess my organization," and from the employee or onboarding sort of parts of the organization in terms of getting buy-in into why I might respond truthfully to this assessment as opposed to just put in answers that I know somebody wants to hear.
Yeah. Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Katie, to that end, is it especially difficult when you know that the assessment is leading to a reduction in forces or a downsizing or to discover duplicate roles? Does that come up?
I think there's probably a couple of things to bear in mind with that. And if it is going to be used in that kind of context, I would always want to have the conversation with the organization around what else is being used and how that assessment comes into play. And it should only ever be one data point. It's only one data point because it is a helpful measure of someone's performance, someone's potential, but it's not the whole picture. It's a 30,
Mm.
40
Right.
minute snapshot of this person's responses. It's not measuring all of their performance in day to day in their role. So I would always kind of have that conversation with the organization around how that assessment is being used in the first instance. But absolutely, I think there's going to be real resistance and hesitation around completing an assessment if it is for a really kind of hard decision to be made.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's very powerful philosophy that your company Sten 10 is bringing into the environment, right? That is part of your package and your value add where you have to sit with these leaders and say, look, one data point is not sufficient to evaluate the entire spectrum of this or that person, right? That's fascinating.
But that goes back to context as well. So selection development, we would always say this is one data point, this is one measurement of that behavior. Your best practice, in an assessment center, anything, you want to be measuring each of those behaviors at least twice to be able to say, yes, we've actually measured this person's strategic vision or their communication, whatever it might be, at least a few times
Sure.
Overtime.
in different scenarios, different tasks, exercises. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Makes sense. Katie, can you can you just explain a little bit about what made you focus in on assessments? Like what brought you? What's your why about this?
What's a good one? I mean, I did psychology in my undergrad, just straight psychology,
Really?
because of my interest in people. Just broadly speaking, my interest in people. And at that point, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. I just enjoyed the study of psychology and individual difference and things. I had kind of considered going more down a clinical route, but it didn't feel quite right for me. It felt a little bit kind of close to home. I'm not one of those people that can kind of compartmentalize bits of my life, but I wanted to do something that would help. And I think it sounds a little bit cheesy, but if you're using assessments and doing assessments with selection and development on a broad kind of population, and that's going to help fairly assess people and get people into roles in a fair way that is then going to meet their wants and needs in a role and mean that they enjoy their job, great. If you're going to develop people and make sure that the right people are on development programs and you're not missing out incredible people because of biases and personal opinions and subjectivity that can come when you're not using a rigorous kind of thorough process like using different assessments. If you're doing those kinds of things, you are helping in some broad kind of, I don't know, umbrella way, you are helping people. And that really appealed to me.
Oh, that's
That's
awesome.
great. It sounds like it's all about getting the right people into the organization that fit their needs and the organization's needs, and that there's a culture mesh, and then also getting the right people into the right roles and making sure that that stays true over time, even if someone moves to a different role or a different department or whatever. But that sort of organizational health,
Mm.
it sounds like it's just so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that two-way kind of match that always speaks to me. Like, yes, getting the right people, of course, that's going to be good for the organization. It's good for the person. It's good for the person. You don't want to be in a role that maybe you're good at, but it doesn't speak to you. It doesn't motivate you. You can do these things, but they're not something that interests you. You're not going to stay there for 3, 4, 5, whatever, how many years. It's not going to be the one for you.
So
Absolutely.
awesome.
That's so true. Katie, do you find that there's generational differences in terms of people sticking with a role that they may not be in love with?
I I hear it. I hear more kind of anecdotally about generational differences, and
Mhm.
I'm always careful about how I interpret them because it is interesting. It's always interesting where you hear these things about millennials doing this and Gen Z doing that, and all of these different things, and people job hopping and or people are want an employee for life. I I always think there's going to be more intra-generational difference. So between me and my friend and me and this person than me and different
Right.
generations. It's too broad of a brush to say there's
Mm,
massive
okay.
kind of generational differences.
Super fair. Yeah.
Right.
Cheryl, did you have a did you have a question you wanted to raise before we go to the break?
I would love to set this question up and we can talk about it on the other side, I suppose.
Oh, that sure.
But Katie, going back to that apprehension that a person who is presented with an assessment, the question that comes to mind is, will my answers be shared? What is the level of confidentiality? And will I answer honestly if I think this will be to my detriment? Or if is it anonymous? Employees are probably on a spectrum with that. Do they believe that they are truly anonymous? And if they are anonymous, is there still value? And are they ever really truly anonymous? That's my question.
There was layers of questions there, Cheryl.
Nothing can be easy with me.
Well, before we peel that onion, why don't we take a quick break and we'll come right back to that, yeah? Okay. We'll be right back. At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we have been talking about assessments with our special guest, Katie. And so, Cheryl, before the break, you brought up a very good question about people feeling safe, essentially, right? About taking assessments.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was saying that with the apprehension around assessments and being judged and being evaluated on this or that data point, when an employee or a leader or anyone who is presented with an assessment, there's that question: how honest can I be? Will it be to my detriment? Are they anonymous? What will be done with the data? The what that we were talking about earlier, and that belief system that my answers will be truly anonymous, or is there value in the assessments if it is anonymous? Are they truly anonymous? And do you ever have to smudge the line on that to get more honest answers? I don't imagine that that would be principled or even ethical, but is there a general approach to what is the level of confidentiality? And I'm sure it depends on the client, but can you talk about that?
It'll vary from kind of client to client. I would always say, what's the intention with the data? What are you going to do with this? And if it doesn't need to be shared beyond X and Y person, why would it? Why would it be shared more broadly? So we were involved in running a leadership development program, and with people's results, it was a really user-friendly report that we put together, but it's helpful, I think, to have a second pair of eyes, a sounding board to talk through that with. So we said to people, this is your report. You can do what you want with it. We recommend looking at this with your line manager or with a trusted mentor. And that's kind of what we included. And depending on the organization, they might say, no, it's really important. This person has to share it with their line manager. And then you put
Mm.
something in the introduction saying explicitly, this will be shared with your line manager and you'll have a follow-up conversation about it, but it won't be shared with anyone else. So I think that putting
Oh,
transparency around how it's going to be used, but if it doesn't need to be shared more broadly, it doesn't need to be shared more broadly, and you can have that anonymity.
fascinating. So it's almost like there are interlayers. It's almost like the HIPAA that we have to sign with our doctor, right? It's like this can only be shared with my emergency contact and my doctor, right? You go into this meeting and conversation and sharing personal information and how you feel about things or how you feel physically with the idea that there is a certain limit to the extent that this will be shared and directly related to you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you think about any kind of selection process, only the hiring team should be involved in seeing the results from any assessments that you're doing. And it's only kind of when you're in the organization and if it's useful for onboarding, maybe you would then be involved in that decision of if you want to share your results and talk about any development priorities that come out of those assessments.
Ah, neat. So you could have a choice in
Yeah.
some cases. You might want to share it. Very, very interesting. So there are very practical measures and language around this idea of defining that anonymity
Hmm.
to a point and getting the optimum truth
Yeah.
from people taking the assessment.
But like you were saying about the moral aspect, always tell people how their data is going to be used. Always tell them. If it's going to be
Sure.
shared with people, let them know.
That's
Makes
an
sense.
excellent principle.
Mm.
Yeah, you would like to think that that's the underlying basis of all of
Mm.
these, right? That transparency. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you find that when people take, a personality-based test, like, so historically, many of us have taken the MBTI or the Myers-Briggs
Type indicator.
type indicator. There you go. Thank you very much. Right, another of our acronyms
Yeah.
that were.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know,
I didn't want to interrupt, but I didn't want to interrupt Katie, but I'll interrupt you, Rich. The
Yep.
first acronym on our show today, Cheryl threw out oh so casually, was HIPAA. For those of you
That was the first.
in the US who may not know HIPAA, since it's not necessarily tossed around that much in the UK, HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. There you have it.
There you go.
Back to
Okay.
your regularly scheduled acronym.
Thank you, Ben. I was so casual about that. I was so insensitive to our cultural diversity on the call.
Well, but the people aren't really using that in the workplace anymore. Right? Is that fair? I mean, they are, but is it as valid and
We're talking about
reliable as it used to?
MBTI. Back
MBTI,
to
right? MBTI.
right.
It depends. It
It depends. That's the psychology answer. There you go.
It is such a consultant answer. I love it.
when you talk about personality assessments, they broadly kind of fall into two camps of being type based or trait based. So we've got Myers Briggs, which is
Right.
probably the most famous type based assessment. And
Type-based, yeah.
I wouldn't really recommend a type based assessment for selection ever, but it can be useful in development context. And it
Hmm.
it's quite a nice one. I used to really dislike MBTI. I've kind of come around to seeing that in some situations it's actually useful. It can be quite a nice, simple assessment, simple output to look at in kind of team development settings. And you can talk about, well, I'm this and you're that. And what does that mean for our relationship? And what are our differences? And how do we complement each other? And it's a good, simple introduction to talking about personality and talking about those individual differences,
Sure.
but absolutely kind of too reductive to use in a selection context and say, these are my
Makes
four
sense.
letters and that's it.
So it's a good
Now,
icebreaker. Sort of like, what sign are you?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a
It's non-threatening.
breaker.
Ju-
Yeah.
what about the ocean though?
Mm,
The big five type of things. Let me see if I got this right. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and
yes.
neuroticism. Right? Is
Mhm.
that
Ding, ding, ding.
yeah? Is that used for? Is that more trait based? Is that more type based? Is that like how? Where would you place that on the
So
spectrum?
that's more trait based. So you do say that everyone's kind of somewhere on that scale. So it's not just that I'm open or I'm not open. I would be somewhere on that openness to experience scale. That's somewhere on that trait. Um, Ocean as a kind of framework um, might not be used as an assessment in and of itself, but it's often underlying in different kind of personality trait based models.
Oh,
So
oh,
it underlies in SHL's OPQ, it underlines in Savile Assessment's Wave personality assessment because it's been so replicated and so seen across cultures, across time, that personality to the broadest extent does kind of bubble down to these five areas. And to be truly useful in a work context, you want to get into the nitty gritty of, okay, so which parts of openness are needed for this role and what do we want to develop? It's too broad at its kind of five levels. Um, but it's a really strong kind of underpinner for trait-based assessments still.
oh, okay, great to know. I think we would be remiss if we didn't say something about the use of artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
What can you say about that? I know we're running up on time here, and I just like probably open up a whole like 3 hour seminar on the use of AI in assessment. But if you could distill that into, maybe
Into one
3 minutes.
little phrase.
And you can feel free to use ChatGPT to do it.
There you go. Right.
I mean, AI is probably the biggest shake-up to the workplace that we've had in at least the last 50 years. And it hasn't finished. It's not like it's been and gone and it's changed everything. The thing that I come back to with AI is this is the worst it's ever going to be. You look at the outputs now, the worst they're ever going to be. It's only ever going to get better. So I think on a few fronts, it's affecting what we do with business psychology because it's changing the workplace. So the skills that we are needing now and will need in the future have changed, will change. And that means that we need to adapt to what we're measuring. So there's this whole argument about developing people's prompt writing and use of AI in itself, but it's also the meta skills that lead to someone actually being interested in staying up to date with AI and wanting to learn about AI and wanting to use it as effectively as they can in the workplace. So there's all of that kind of difference. It's also affecting how we can assess people because candidates might want to use AI to enhance their responses. And I think carefully
Mm.
there around enhance their responses because there's a real kind of ethical question. Is it cheating? Is it cheating? If it's a tool that someone is going to use in their role, isn't it quite a smart, useful thing that they're using it in their selection process as well?
That makes sense. Sure.
There's
Yeah.
so much with AI.
Yeah,
So
we
much.
were actually as a faculty at the school where I teach, we were talking about, and the business department are us allowing students to use it, and within the context of you're going to use this in the workplace probably. We allow it, but there's guidelines, of
Mhm.
course, ethical and other considerations. It makes a lot of sense if it pertains to your role and how you're going to be and live and behave in the workplace. You have to assess whether or
Right.
not, or evaluate, I
So
should say, to what extent people are allowed to use it. Yeah.
And then how effectively they're using it as well. There are grades between if
Yeah.
someone's using it and it's going to be kind of patchy, or if someone's using it in a really efficient or effective way. That's a good thing. But there is still a question of
Are there
if people are using it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And so maybe the question is, maybe we've already moved past are people using it to yes, everyone is. And if you are not, that's at your risk, right? We may be even past the idea that people aren't using it. I don't know if we're there yet, but
Are there assessments yet that can measure one's competence in using AI or those types of things, or is that still a emerging?
mm,
It's emerging. I've started to see some things kind of coming up on LinkedIn about people looking at doing this.
Okay. All right. Right on.
but there must be assessments that have been around for a long time that can give you a sense of someone's aptitude or interest in upskilling themselves, or like you were saying before, Katie, learning and growing, and sort of their internal motivation or their internal growth mindset, which you could sort of
Yeah,
apply broadly to, are they likely to want to learn about AI? Are they likely to want to train themselves on AI, use it appropriately, use it ethically, that kind of thing?
yeah, absolutely. So coming back to the ocean model, someone's openness to experience, how open are they to new technology and that kind of learning agility. It's a kind of tacit measure, but that would kind of track on to people's use of AI.
Makes sense.
makes sense.
Well, we're
Rich, I know
just
you're trying to wrap up. I gotta do it. I
you
gotta
go
do
ahead.
it.
Do it. Do it.
Katie, is there a favorite story you have about an assessment gone awry, or a metric gone awry? And it could be, it doesn't have to be sort of like someone lost their job or whatever. It could be funny. Like, we were trying to measure Ben's ability to cook dinner, and what we really found out was that he has no skills playing soccer. I mean, football, sorry. What if something like a cool assessment story?
Oh, I feel like I'm the least cool person, Ben. uh,
Well,
I think my favorite assessment story. I mean, we've had candidates before that have. When I was working at an assessment provider, I had a candidate CC us into an email that they had intended to send to their dad, saying, "I've got the assessment reset. Can you sit it for me now?" And it was
Oh,
such a oh no.
yeah.
So, that that was that was not intended. That was not intended for us, and that was really awkward. It does go to show people have always wanted to try to cheat on assessments, and it hasn't just come out of AI. If people have the motivation to
Sure.
do it, they'll
Sure.
find a way.
So, well, people have been gaming the system for years. That's
Yeah.
part of what humans do. What,
There
in
was
that
there
case,
was a
did you?
cottage industry, and somebody taking somebody's tests at school for them or writing their
Well,
papers.
I
So,
mean, here, yeah, for sure. And
oh,
here in Chicago, people vote many, many times for dead people. So it's just a thing. Katie, in that situation, can I ask, did you alert that person that maybe they shouldn't have their parent sit the exam? Or did you mention to the employer that this may not be the right candidate?
I
Or
we did
can you share
we
anything
didn't
there?
go as far as saying this might not be the wrong candidate, but we did kind of let the organization know
Ah,
that they could
okay.
make an informed decision about what they do with that person result.
Right. Right. Love that.
No
Thank you
points
for
for
sharing. That's
no
great.
points for innovation,
And
thinking outside the box,
like,
um,
might be a
trying to get ahead,
maybe a safer
trying to get ahead,
innovation.
It's delegation.
Hey,
Hey, right?
trying to get ahead in it.
it's opening the circle of trust, bringing family and friends in. It's like calling an island on whatever that TV show was here in the US.
Oh, oh, the level of agreeableness in this room is just too high sometimes.
Yeah, I know. We need more conflict. Maybe we need to take an assessment to see which one of us should be bringing the conflict.
Always looking for the pony.
Right on. Well, Katie, can you do us a huge favor? The floor is yours. Can you tell people how they can reach you, how they can leverage assessments better? Just again, the floor is yours.
I mean, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect and keep in touch. I'm Katie Thomas at Sten10. Look up my company because there's lots of Katie Thomas. Look up Sten10 and you'll find me there. And then, I'm sorry, Rich, what was the second part you said?
Oh no, just this is
Yeah, are
your
there
infomercial.
any specific things, Katie, you'd like to share in terms of favorite resources or things that you've put out there that people should be aware of?
Oh, sign up to our assessment club newsletter. It's
Oh,
fortnightly. It's 3 little snippets of articles. We share timely, up-to-date information about what's happening in assessment with selection and development. And it's always really varied, the different kinds of things. Sometimes we'll share case studies, sometimes we'll share things from the news. Sometimes we share best practice about theories in assessment. But yeah, it's fortnightly, it's free, and I am the editor, so I would strongly
oh, awesome.
That is so cool.
I
I
can
had
I
no idea there's an assessment club.
I can personally vouch for it. Katie got my attention first with your just practical, easygoing, down to earth videos and LinkedIn posts that you would write. And you were just making your observations were just so practical and just so easy and open and just honest the way you did them. And it wasn't like I felt like you were just, trying to, like so many others on LinkedIn, there is this push for this brand identity. And you were just like, do you ever wonder why? And then I signed up for the newsletters and I encourage everyone to do so. Just like Katie said, it's 3 sections. It's very accessible. It's not doom scrolling to get to the bottom. It's literally beautifully done. And I love seeing a new one every time it comes out.
I should
Awesome.
Cool. And for those of us on this side of the pond, fortnightly is every 2 weeks.
Right.
Oh,
It has nothing to do with the video game,
oh,
kids.
yeah.
no infringement on that, please.
All
Yes,
right.
that's the
Well,
only way.
thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Um, and as we like to say, as we raise our glasses, is make change your friend. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network. And remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.